Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar and a specialist on Iran as well. Welcome to France 24, Mehran. Good to talk to you tonight. Let's first of all talk about the power dynamic, the leverage, as you understand it, of the past few days. So we have this scenario that since last Sunday, the US putting on this kind of double blockade, for want of a better word, on Iranian ports. You have President Trump saying at some point he expects Iran to cry uncle, was his term, to kind of give in. We hear yesterday Iran saying that the strait's completely open. Lots of caveats, lots of questions about whether it was really open, whether there's a toll, what's going on. Today that's been reversed, Iran saying there's not good faith. Talk us through how you see this week and the reading of it, perhaps from looking at it from the regime perspective.
Well, it's obvious that Iran sees the Strait of Hormuz as a major source of leverage. There are three issues, Gavin, that are points of contention. One is the issue of sanctions and Iranian assets abroad that are frozen and sanctions that are imposed on Iran. The other is the Iranian nuclear program. And the third, it appears, is Hormuz. And so whether or not Iran has some sort of either influence or coordinating role in directing traffic or collecting toll, it appears that the Iranians are sticking hard and fast to that. And of course, I think we need to remember that the Iranians had said they would lift their control over Hormuz if the Americans lift the blockade. And so long as that blockade on Iranian ports and on ships going in and out of Iran remains in existence, then the Iranians appear determined to control the Strait of Hormuz in one form or another.
It's a very interesting point, Mehran. I want to also hear about, as well as the leverage that's going on, what's going on inside Iran. I know you've been looking at the situation because it seems kind of many moons ago, doesn't it? We were talking about January, the uprising, because the level of resentment, the level of kind of organization. I know one thing that you've been talking about recently is kind of a hardening of pro-regime activists.
Absolutely. One of the things we've seen over the last couple of weeks in particular is a series of what the average person in Iran considers insults to Iranian culture, civilization, and heritage. And on top of that, there's been bombardment of a number of cultural and heritage sites in Iran, in Tehran and in other Iranian cities, and of course, widespread devastation and death and destruction. So one of the things we're seeing is that the longer this war is dragging on, the less that the Islamic Republic is becoming unpopular. I'm not saying it's becoming more popular, but it is becoming less unpopular. And although we have not yet seen a rally around the flag effect, we are seeing an agitation of Iranian sense of nationalism and pride. These insults that the American president has been putting on social media are not necessarily helping the American cause. And in fact, they are causing many Iranians to feel quite patriotic and determined to defend the country.
A thought on Mujtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader. A new statement today, not seen, not heard. It might sound ridiculous. Do you think he's alive? If he's alive, how badly you might think he's injured? And to explain a bit about the dynamic, because many analysts would point to the fact that the dynamics changed, and understanding the voice, that perhaps he is even more now the voice of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah, absolutely. Even before coming to power, we assumed that Mujtaba Khamenei would be very close to the Revolutionary Guards. And in fact, it was assumed that his candidacy or his selection was the choice of the Revolutionary Guards because he was so close to many of the commanders. And so what we're seeing, particularly now under war circumstances, is a hardening of Iran's position. And the statements that are attributed to Mojtaba Khamenei are really in support of the positions of the IRGC, of the Revolutionary Guards.
Which takes us to Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who's the chief negotiator, the parliament speaker, and my understanding is a long-time close friend, if not close associate, of the new supreme leader, a man with a checkered past, a man who apparently, just tell us more, that the supreme leader personally gave him a get out of jail card effectively, or got him out of trouble in Turkey in the past. Just tell me the dynamic between those two, because it is worth knowing, isn't it, as to maybe this talks continue again in Pakistan. We're going to hear more of Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf.
Yeah, Ghalibaf is an interesting figure. He's a perennial presidential candidate. He has been a presidential candidate 4 times in Iran, and he wants to add that to his resume. He was formerly mayor of Tehran, currently the speaker of the Iranian parliament, and previously one of the commanders of the Revolutionary Guards, a licensed pilot, I might add, and someone who in his earlier days presented himself as a developmentalist figure, someone who took pride in making Tehran the mega city, the modern mega city that it is. And of course, as you mentioned, we assume that he has long had close relations with Khamenei, because Ghalibaf's hands are not clean. He was linked with several major corruption scandals. He was also involved in a major crackdown on university student protests. And so he's been one of those government insiders who also, I might add, carries a lot of weight in the political system. And Gavin, if I may just add something, you've been asking about Mojtaba Khamenei, and of course he's quite important. But I think what's even more important now is the actual people who are making policy. And we don't quite know to what extent Mojtaba Khamenei is involved in policy making. But certainly the Revolutionary Guards, the president, and the Speaker of Parliament, all 3 centers of power are quite important in kind of collective leadership of Iran. And that, I think, is very important to keep in mind. The country is ticking, it's functioning under war circumstances. And I think it's a mistake by the Americans to assume that the country is leaderless in one form or another.
That's a very good point. And I want to touch upon that, because you have the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, you have the foreign minister, we know he's in Turkey at the moment, Abbas Araghchi, who wasn't chosen to go to Pakistan, and perhaps that's notable in itself. It was the parliament speaker, the ex-commander of the Revolutionary Guard as well, which we've been talking about, Ghalibaf. And to try to work out the quote, one voice of the government, one voice of the regime, when we listen to Araghchi, when we listen to Pezeshkian, do we have to kind of put that in context, perhaps take it to some extent with a pinch of salt, given that maybe that's not the official message? How should we read that?
Well, it was the Iranians who requested that the American delegation to Islamabad in the last round include people other than Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, because they said, we don't trust these guys. Previously, we were negotiating with them twice, and Israel attacked. And so the Americans added Vice President Vance. And in that regard, within that context, then Iran had the Speaker of the Iranian parliament. So I'm not sure if we can say that Araghchi is now playing a secondary role. Certainly, what we're seeing is that the Revolutionary Guards are indeed conducting the war, but the presidency and the executive, part of which is the foreign minister, are in charge of diplomacy. And also, you mentioned Pezeshkian. He's also running the country's domestic politics. And that's quite an important division of labor that has emerged between the foreign minister in charge of diplomacy, the president in charge of running the day-to-day affairs of the state, and then the Speaker of the Parliament as the primary liaison and primary face of the Revolutionary Guards.
Tell us this, Mehran. It's kind of like watching this bizarre tennis match right now. We look one way, we see President Trump telling us this rosy, glorious picture of how close we are to an end, that Iran are basically going to work together to take what he calls the nuclear dust to the US, and it's going to be happy days. We listen to the Iranians who say that's not the case on the other side. When you're looking at this, trying to understand where the reality may lie, where are you looking?
That's an excellent point. And I was quite relieved to hear that today the President of the United States said he will not talk about Iran, because it's all the hyperbole coming out of Washington, whether it's by the President or the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, that is in many ways muddying the water. And I think it's really important for negotiations not to be done on social media, but to be done behind closed doors. And so, I think amid all the noise, it's really important to pay attention to the substance, although that might be quite difficult given the current circumstances.
Pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Mehran, really good to talk to you. Mehran Kamrava, Professor of Government at Georgetown University in Qatar and specialist on Iran. Thank you.